approximately 800 years ago, the new college in Oxford was founded. Even today, after this long passage of time, it's still known as New College. One of its great architectural features were the 40-foot beams that supported the roof. After 500 years, it was realized that these beams needed replacing, and there was a bit of a panic because they realized that England no longer had the old growth oak trees that would have been required for this. Fortunately, after some investigation, it was discovered that the original founders had had the forethought to plant a grove of trees with the express purpose of using them for replacement. Makes me wonder today if 200 years ago they had the same forethought and planted more trees, because this building still stands. There's another aspect of using old trees, and that relates to the Tudor period. We're all familiar with the black and white houses that remain from this era. These again used up lots of what we now call old growth timber. Also, the Tudors greatly expanded the British Navy. At the time it was for the wars against Spain. They also managed to run out of the timbers required for the keel and the tall trees that were required for the masts. It was said that during the time of the Romans, a monkey, if indeed there were monkeys in England, which is doubtful, but a monkey could travel from the north to the south of England, swinging from branch to branch. The population of the islands at the time was estimated to be around about 5 million. So it's with the population growth that fields were cleared. Timber, of course, was used also for heating, in addition to the houses that were required. So obviously timber was being harvested at a faster rate than it could be replenished. In order to continue the build-up of the British Navy, the New World, as it was then known, was scoured and effectively pillaged for these old oak trees that were required for the keel and the pines for the masts. This has gone on continuously, with there being less and less old growth timber. Just as an interesting side note, when in the 1980s British television wished to make a new series around the legend of Robin Hood, many sites were used, but not the old area of Sherwood Forest, because once again it didn't have the old oak and other old trees that were give it that authentic feel of the old growth forest. Adam Smith, in his monumental work The Wealth of Nations, also discusses the true cost of materials and as to whether replacement costs should be considered. This is when hunters were going across the Americas and slaughtering wild animals for their meat. The American Plains Indians would have a great discussion before killing any particular animal, and they would use up the whole of the carcass, every single bit, meat, bones, sinews, etc. were given a use. Contrast this with the Europeans who roamed the plains, slaughtering the buffalo, taking just the prime cuts and leaving the rest of the carcass to rot. Some say, as a kind of joke, that it isn't that Bedouins live in the desert, they created the desert. Not entirely true, but they don't give forethought to replenishing anything. This of course works quite well when you have a small number of people and a large area of land. You can go, let your animals graze, strip it bare, and then move on. This of course also contrasts with the Plains Indians, who have the saying that you don't inherit the earth, you borrow it from your children. This also gives rise to me thinking, are we inheriting the earth or are we borrowing it from our children? We are increasingly coming round to this feeling of borrowing, in that we do tend to put pressure on companies now to clean up their industrial waste and put money into funds to clean up any waste that they might be creating now. This is opposed to the last couple of 100 years when cleanup didn't even come into the calculation. Some of this of course is just pure economics. We have to live. We live from the profits that we glean from our activities, and not always is there any money left over for cleanup. And besides, not everyone even thought of cleanup. The ocean used to be thought of as one enormous dumping ground that went on forever. There's certain evidence now that this certainly is not the case. No longer can fishermen just go to the ocean, drag up as many fish as they need without worrying about replenishment. The Great British Institution of Fish and Chip Shops is certainly being impacted by the drop in the number of fish that you can just pull out of the ocean, and thought is being given to quotas of fish that can be taken. On another aspect, we, despite the change in the price of fuel at the pump, still continue to drive everywhere, use oil, as a principal means of fueling engines, but of course that's just part of the economic life of the country and the world. Some economists will tell you that the natural price of oil, as they call it, in a true free market economy would be slightly over $20 a barrel. Makes me wonder what's happening to the other $80. Certainly some of the buildings that are going up in Dubai show that they are getting a lot of profit, but that's another economic argument. But one of the advantages of the price going up is that it does force people to think about the price of fuel and possible alternatives. When the automobile concept was being toyed with 100 plus years ago, steam power and batteries were also under consideration, in addition to the internal combustion engine. Neither were practical answers, but today we are seeing some more thought through batteries. But even batteries use up some of the minerals known as rare earth minerals. But the search does go on for alternative means of fueling. Does make me wonder, of course, what we're going to use for aeroplanes. I can't see them being powered by massive batteries. So some other high energy form of fuel will have to be found, unless of course we're able to conserve the limited supplies of liquid fuel. Now, I'm not one who buys into this theory of global warming being caused by human activity, but again, I see no reason why we shouldn't be sensible in our use of energy. Proper insulation, etc., just to conserve what resources we have, and of course not pay too much money on the heating bill. The same would go for the preservation of the rainforest. Not because of the global warming theory, but the great wonders of nature that can be found there. Some have even said that we're probably destroying plants that could be used for medicines that we haven't even discovered a use for yet. So perhaps we should more be working with the basis of borrowing the earth from our children, not just inheriting the earth. Great old growth forests are beautiful. Let's do what we can to preserve them, use them sensibly. Not that we need to build any more great sailing ships with great big keels on them or super tall masts, but instead of just taking our grandchildren to a tree preserve and show them what an oak tree looks like, in much the same way that we might take them to the zoo to show them what an elephant looks like before they disappear from the wild. We could have great forests everywhere. It was in Britain in the 1920s they decided to catch up on some tree planting. Unfortunately they chose only pines. I hope they will eventually get round to planting a whole variety of trees. so that there can be natural forests as they used to be. And perhaps again in the future there won't be problems of making Robin Hood movies and not finding old growth forests. And of course that we can go for walks and picnics in true great old forests, and not just think that when we sit under a tree that was planted 30-40 years ago and go, wow, it's so old. Future planning is always good, though it should never negatively impact our current economic standard of living. But future planning, as I said, it's always good and something to think about.